Welcome to the Saint Disruption Podcast, where brilliant musicians, poets, and visionaries come together to share their creative collaborations and explore what it means to be human in these times.
Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the Saint Disruption Podcast. We are absolutely delighted today to have two very esteemed guests, Jahman Hill and Oteil Burbridge, who collaborated on two of Jahman's poems. We're going to debut those today on the show and hopefully have some really interesting, deep dialogue about the poems, their meaning, and they're really powerful work. So we're super excited to share this with you. Also joining us today is my podcast partner in crime, John Medeski. Hey, John.
Yeah, good to be here.
It's good to see all y'all's beautiful faces today with us. So just by way of some introductions, for those of you who may not know Professor Hill, he is a renowned award-winning poet, playwright, and truth teller. He's been in the past few years consistently ranked as one of the world's top slam poets. And in 2019, I guess it was, you wrote, produced, and starred in an off-Broadway work called Black Enough that has received tremendous accolades. And then you followed that up with a film that has, I guess, shown and gotten quite a bit of credits and awards in 3 independent film festivals called Van der Waals Journey. And that it's such a super work. I really appreciate how you sort of created a very modern, sort of Ulyssian hero's journey that was so relevant to these times. So beautiful. You're also a professor at the University of Alabama, which is, I guess, your alma mater as well.
Yep.
You've got master's degrees in both communication studies and women's studies. We are so delighted to have you with us. And for those of you who are really interested in checking out some of Jahman's other work, check out Jahmanhill.com, JahmanHill.com, where you'll find information about his poetic works, his film work, and all sorts of other exciting things that you're up to. So welcome, brother. It's really good to have you with us today, and it's great to have had the privilege to sit with your poetry for these past months and try to create some sonic landscape that at least attempts to meet the incredible power of your words. So thank you. And also, Oteil Burbridge, this is your second time with us, brother. This is the first, I guess, musical debut edition of the podcast that you've been with us. If you're interested in Oteil's early history with Aquarium Rescue Unit and Colonel Bruce and Jeff Sipe and all those guys, the second episode of the Saint Disruption Podcast is a great deep dive into really the essence of spiritual apprenticeship and the learning and healing path of music. It's really a great episode. So welcome. I think you're probably someone who needs very little introduction, but just in case some of our listeners may not know the depth and breadth of what you've done, you're a multi-instrumentalist, probably known best for your extraordinary bass virtuosity, a co-founder of Colonel Bruce Hampton's Aquarium Rescue Unit, Medeski Trucks co-founder, and you were with the Allman Brothers as bass player for something like 17 years. That's extraordinary.
Yeah, 17 big ones.
Also a founding member of Dead and Company, and you guys just had your maybe final completely epic tour. I mean, wow. I'm surprised you haven't like dematerialized into some etheric being after that craziness. Wow, that just witnessing it from afar seemed really quite amazing. And you can learn more about Oteil's work at oteilburbridge.com, where you can find information about upcoming tour dates with Oteil and friends, and also Oteil is a podcaster and has a really uplifting, positive podcast. Comes a time And I have to say, it's really in these challenging transformational times, it is a breath of fresh air. So
Thank you.
yeah, man, it's great. It's great to be with each of you. Jeez, wow, this is so fantastic. So anyway, we were very fortunate. Oteil and I were very fortunate to receive 2 poems from Jahman, and we'll debut those in just a second. The first one we'll debut is called Float, and the second one is called Wisdom. And just to remind those of you who might be new to the podcast, one of the things that we do here is foster collaboration and mentorship between poets and truth tellers and legendary musical artists to create new ways of expression, new mashups of sonic landscapes and poetry. It's pretty exciting for us. And so this is one of those shows where we're debuting some new material that hopefully will be entertaining and inspiring. Any words from you, co-host John, before we listen to
the track? I think the tracks are great. They're looking at, and I guess I have one question for Oteil. Really, final tour?
That's what they say. As far as I know, it's final.
Okay.
So we'll see. I was talking to somebody who's been in the business for a long time. He was like, final. I went to the Eagles' final tour in '87 or whatever. It was in the '80s. It's like whatever. So
Yeah, we'll see.
2043, here we come. All right. So without further ado, we are delighted to share with you Float.
Is it the rhythm or the waves? Either way, the bass is home. Here, we hide from the sun deeper. Here, you can feel it in your chest. You can drown in the alcohol before the water takes you, and even then, the water will still take you. And every nigga in here knows bass and buoyancy are so closely related, you can taste both in the glass here. Niggas float, and that's the same thing as flying. When we bob to the beat, we are one with the ones that jumped, the sharks that followed, the beasts that worshipped the sea. We walk on, we who waded with whales just as magnificent, with our melanin always sinking. They say there's something in the water, the answer, niggas. They tried to drown us, but they forgot we were ocean and Mother Earth and Father Time. Here, the spirits are liquid fire. We burn you to the touch. This is the next time. This is the brightest destruction, in the base will break you if you're not strong enough, and you aren't. You will succumb to the waves, this ocean, as tumultuous as our journey through it, as treacherous as the monsters lying in the wake. We all the wake. There's something in the water. Niggas. We who are born deeper than 6 feet, we don't fear the grave. Death is just a come up. We pushing daisies with living hands. The base is a resurrection. The water will heal you. Wade in your revival. Drown in the rebirth, black child. This ocean is your friend.
What a fantastic piece. Hats off to our brother Jeff Sipe, who goes all the way back more than 20 years with Oteil. Jeff came over to my studio a couple months back, and we started banging on drums and came up with some tracks that ended up on this piece. So Jeff wasn't able to be with us today, but big hats off. One of the best drummers in the US of A. It's really, really great to have his energy on here too. So it's kind of a funny story. You know, we sent out an initial mix that was dry. I think it was really funny. It was like, Jahman was like, we need more water on this thing. So kind of tried to bring in some water. There's a whale sample, and then I morphed Oteil's there was a couple longer sustained bass notes that you did, and I tried to morph your just take a little sample and morph it into a whale sound. So tried to add water that way. It ended up being really, really fun, really, really exciting. That feedback was great. Probably the single most exciting thing for me about this poem is that it speaks to a piece of indigenous wisdom that I think we are well advised to grapple with at this time in history in the industrialized world, and that is the duality, this powerful duality of annihilation and liberation. That, you know, in this particular point of our evolution as human beings, you know, the ancient wisdom traditions of this earth always remind us that there is no initiation without a scar. There's no true growth without leaving the village, going into the darkness, into the water where, you know, underneath the surface lies danger, but underneath that surface is the place where all things are born. Underneath that surface is where your ultimate liberation happens. And that is awesome. I love that.
Childbirth is hard.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only way to get the, you know, the ultimate beauty. So,
and it's something too, like, even in the way you described it, I was like, I was like, I'm gonna pull up the lyrics while we listen. And I was like, I just closed my eyes once it started. I was like, oh no, I'm gonna listen. And like, you know, it's just one of those things where it's this grappling with the ocean, and I think that there's like historically, when it comes to Black people in particular in water, there's like this really interesting relationship where it's like you hear things such as like Black people can't swim, or Black people don't want to get their hair wet, or you know, all these different things that speak to this fear of water, when historically though at the same time water has functioned as a means to escape, a means to freedom, a means to rebirth in a way. And that's what I've been like calling my artist friends recently, and just asking them like, how you feel about water? Like, that's like, they're like, hey, I got a random question. I'm like, how do you feel about water? Why do you think we're like afraid of water? Like, what is our relationship with water? And really exploring this idea, a lot of my writing recently has been about that. So when you guys reached out to me, I was like, I knew like I'm gonna send them at least something about water. And it was fun to I love the feedback process too, because I'm usually a person who's gonna just like whatever is sent, I'm like, all right, cool, it works. That's what it was meant to be. But I was like, no, let's add some more water. I was like, I feel it in my bones. Like, let's add some more water. And I love like the renditions and how the feedback changed the piece, changed the music. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is fun.
Well, what have you been finding out about water in your more recent deep dive?
first, I don't know if the pun was intended, but that's the first thing that I learned is we have so much language associated with water that we use in our everyday conversation. And then especially when I look at hip hop and Black folk, we have this relationship with water. Like as an artist, you know, you've got that flow, or you spit bars, right? There are these like different things. We have an MP3 file, but if you really want you gotta get the wave file.
right? If you want the best version, you get the wave file. So it's like there are these little things that exist, even within music, that just tie us back to water. And it's like, okay, now I see how water just plays a role, even unintentionally, um, in the ways in which we think of music, production, creation. And it's just been really interesting to kind of see and hear, like when people hear water, like what are the thoughts, like the emotions. Whenever I'm working with my team of producers, I never, because I'm not a technically trained, I don't have any of the terminology. When I'm speaking with my producers and stuff, I'm like, make this sound more purple. I'm like, whatever that means for you. That's what I like. Make this sound more purple. Make this sound like more deep sea. Let's make this sound more. I think like one of the words I used, because I was like, I know this word. I was like, it's a little staccato. How can we unstaccato this a little bit, right? How can we roughen up the edges? Um, like I'm like those are the, so I'm always like interested in like, okay, this is how I feel. I'm just gonna say how I feel instead of trying to fit it into a certain language. I'm gonna take whatever the interpretation of that is, and that's gonna be what's fun about it. So that's what I've been discovering in these conversations about water is like everybody is grappling with it. Like nobody really thinks about it. It's kind of like breathing. It's like, I never really thought like maybe like what is there's so much we don't know about water. There's so much we haven't explored. And I feel like it's an amazing metaphor for just for a lot of things in life.
It is so powerful. What's as a as a scientist, I have seen more emotionally intensified debates and confusion about the nature of water. It is probably the one material thing that remains around us in Western culture that we understand very, very little about. It is miraculously bizarre as a substance. It does many things that it really shouldn't do, and other materials that are similar to it don't do. For instance, when it freezes, it becomes less dense and it floats, which is kind of interesting during the title of your poem. And the fact that happens has actually had a huge bearing on the evolution of life on this planet. And many people say that memory is held inside water, and both physical and that are beyond our understanding of physics. These hydrogen bond networks seem to be able to sustain themselves through time. And I know in the ancient cultures, in pre-Incan culture in the Andes, priests and priestesses would sit in these stepped water fountains, and they would sit at the top and they would infuse the water with certain prayers, certain properties that then patients who were having like illnesses or whatever would then imbue, sitting in pools down below as the water would move past them. The Cherokee consider flowing water as the wisest healer on the planet. So it's such a wonderful mystery just all around us.
It's crazy that modern science has dealt with it so little when it's 3/4 of the planet.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
We're all 60% water.
Yeah, and all the religions, like one of the commandments in ancient Egypt is that they were called negative confessions. I have not done this. I have not done that. I have not damned a body of moving water. That was like a commandment,
That's
or
so
a sin,
interesting,
if you will. Yeah. So when you think about baptism and everything, like every culture, it has incredible religious significance. Every myth, every fairy tale, like it's ubiquitous, and yet the scientists don't know that much about it. It's crazy.
It's like, there's so much of it too. I think back to Oteil, like the very first thing you said at the end of when you were saying like childbirth is hard. I think of the I guess you would call it like almost the birth canal of the African American is the Atlantic Ocean, right?
That's what I thought about. Yeah.
Yeah, and that like going back to what was said earlier about the memories, right? That's something I'm very obsessed with is
Yes.
like what are the memories that this Atlantic Ocean holds? What does it mean to in an earlier poem way back in the day when I first started this there's a person I want to call back to Christina Sharp has this book In the Wake talking about blackness and I remember thinking our ancestors, those who died in the transatlantic or in during the transatlantic travel, like who died in the Atlantic Ocean, if they become water and I'm drinking water, I am okay. So I'm ingesting.
Literally.
I'm ingesting my
Yeah.
ancestors. They're literally their memories and things like I'm literally ingesting them. What does this mean? Right? What does this mean when my body becomes not just water, but also ancestral? Like there's like that's where that line, there's something
Yes.
in the water, niggas. Like that's like this idea of like what happens
Yeah.
when we think through the memories that exist and our constant absorption of those memories, how might they influence us? Like what kind of
Yeah.
revelations are we living with that we've yet realized, right? And how do they
Because I
manifest?
feel I
Yeah.
definitely feel them, and if epigenetics is true, then the people. Because when I thought of water, when I first moved away from home. I lived in Virginia Beach, right on the water, and it was
Mm,
just horror. I felt such
mhm,
deep pain, such deep
mm,
pain, and I wonder, like it made me. That's why it took me a long time to move back close to the ocean again. But then, if my first thought of people that chose death over coming here and committed suicide in that water,
mhm.
or were thrown in,
Yeah.
because or whatever. I just think of all. That's my first thought is of the Atlantic Ocean, is all the dead bodies of Black people making their way here and the horror. That's what I associate with the Atlantic Ocean is horror. And I
Mhm,
felt it the first time I moved close to there.
mhm.
And so if for the people that made it, if we do have like genetic memory, we all need therapy. We come out like
Yes.
as soon as we can like make, you know, compound sets or whatever, like as soon as we communicate by like 8 or whatever, you need the therapy because you're dealing with
Mhm.
stuff that you don't even know where it comes from,
Yeah.
And I have a
And
friend that and from Virginia Beach. He remembers not being able to go to the beach because he was older than me. His brother drowned
Mhm.
in shallow water because they never learned to
Mm,
swim. And I was just
mhm.
like, he's just over that line. We're not that far apart, but he's just over
Mhm.
that line age-wise where, we all learned to swim. So now I'm reversing it. Your poem struck me so hard because I went from that at 19 to now living at the beach again. And now it's healing me and I'm connecting with it. And it's like
Mhm.
get, letting that dark stuff flow through. Like you just nailed
Mhm.
it in that poem, man. You really like,
It's so interesting to hear like what other because I was very interested in like what emotions, imagery, ideas that the poem evoked. Especially for you, Oteil, like because you're making because the second track when we talk about that one I took what y'all sent me and was like, okay, from this I'm inspired to do this. This one I was like, let me
yeah.
send the words and see how that inspires you. So like what words like tell me about this first time when you first heard it. Tell me about that experience. I'm really interested to learn a little bit more about it.
When it started out with the bass, I was like, oh, okay, it's about the bass. And I really went back to like Southeast Washington, D.C. in the early 70s. And that's why I thumped it, you know, um,
Yeah.
because that was like going all the way back, you know.
Hmm.
Um, but then all the stuff that you were saying, like, I guess just where I'm at now in my life at this age, um,
Mhm.
it just really hit me. So, I just tried to get a rolling groove. I played banjo and it has this rolling
Mhm.
quality. And so I tried to do this line that was rolling like that, which
Mm.
also makes me think of water, and,
Mhm.
and just, and that's my only thing is I think you should turn the bass up more. Because he says it's bass, man. Bass is the thing.
Yes.
So it's like
Yeah.
the bass should be super loud. But I'm biased. but
We'll
but
get it louder. We'll get it louder.
yeah, but no, I really it hit me so hard, and it hits me harder now, like listening to it after the fact. Because before I
Mhm.
was really trying to think of where I'm at, and I don't want to conflict with the flow. So I'm trying to do something that can run concurrent, and
Mhm.
there we go again, current,
Yep. Yep. Yep.
right? So, but now as I focus more on the poem, I'm really happy that the world's young people are not lost. It's good.
Look, we are, but we're making them work. We're we're
Well, we didn't
lost. We're
leave you
figuring.
with much good to work. Just erase what we did. And, start.
It's so interesting though. It's like it's so this poem I wrote before I knew we were going to be doing this project, and I knew I wanted to send something. And a lot of times, like with the serendipity of everything is just like ridiculous. So when I was like, let me go in. I want them to do something with water. And it was like, oh, 2 lines in, we're talking about the bass. I was like, this was meant for Oteil. Like, I was like, 2 lines in, we're talking about the bass, and we're bringing it back to this idea of bass. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is what it has to be. This idea of where I think music and rhythm play such a huge role in our lives. I mean, we literally have a heartbeat. Like that is our sign of
Yeah.
life is a beat. So like how do we how like what role does music now play for us as creatives and as creative human beings? So I think all human beings are creative, and
Mm.
that's there's like you said, there's so many different things to pull. When I write, a lot of times I write with my eyes closed. And like or I'll type with my eyes closed and just kind of let
Cool.
whatever's happening take hold, and then I'll go back and see, did this make sense?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
That's how we do music a lot.
Yeah, it's the
That's how
same
we do
way. Just
music a lot. Why do you think it is that bass? Because you got me thinking just now. What is why do we think bass and water together? Because I always have, and I wonder if
yeah.
it's not this heartbeat thing. Is it the womb? Because we're all sitting in this water in the womb, hearing this
Mhm.
beat, you know, and
It's
the womb maybe is, it's
it has to do
bassy.
with
Inside the
depth.
womb, it's got to sound
Yeah.
like boom, 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 like
Yeah.
really bassy, I would imagine,
Yeah, because we
especially to a
imagine like
teeny little.
it's like the most and I can only speak to specifically African American like experience, especially coming up as someone who was born in the 90s. So we're talking about when hip hop, we're entering gangsta era, hip hop with NWA, fuck the police, this whole gangster rap, West Coast rap starting to take over, and then Southern rap in the early 2000s when we're entering the blog era, and then going into our current the trap. I think it's termed right now the trap era, where it's really a lot Southern. This
Yeah.
this existence of the bass. And how much bass do you have in your music, and there's like a certain level of depth that I think of. And I think that's where I think
Yeah.
of water. Like there's this depth to bass
Yeah.
and this depth
The depth.
to water that both require like a diving in, if you will. But it takes it when it hits your body, you're right. Bass doesn't hit you here. It's not a head sound. It's a core sound. It's like you like I remember my audio at my nonprofit at our venue. We got a subwoofer, and he's like, for the subwoofer, when you're listening for it, you gotta like listen low. He's like, listen low. Listen low, listen deeper. That's how we can tell, if the sub is doing its job. We want to make sure that you can hear it low. You're gonna feel it here. And I'm like, oh. He's like, yeah, go stand in this corner of the room, right? And this is where it's gonna be hiding the most. Like,
Yeah.
this is where it's gonna go. You're gonna find it in the corner of the room.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, so now we're diving deep into like even where the sound is physically located, right? And it's like, okay, I can see this relation between this idea of depth and water and bass and just kind of this tie. I don't know.
You know what's really interesting, guys, is that there is an articulation of the collective unconscious that goes way, way back, way before Carl Jung. Many native cultures around the world speak of a great river that connects all people right at the pelvic floor. Yeah, right below the first chakra area.
India, Egypt, everywhere. The river, man, like, from the Mississippi River, the Nile, the Ganges, just everywhere. It's.
I mean, I think now with as bass has gotten louder and bigger in live music with subwoofers and things like that, it's become, and especially with hip hop, it's become much more prevalent as like obviously, the thing that makes the music. But like forever, it's like when you would hear a band and the bass player wasn't happening or his time wasn't happening, you wouldn't know why you didn't like the band. You would be like, oh, that bass, this band would be great with a different bass player. You just be like, this doesn't feel right. I don't like this. This doesn't feel good. And really the bass is the feel, it's about feel too, right? How the bass relates to the drums, to the drummer. That's where the feel comes from. And it's sort of like what suspends the music, and which makes me think of the water and like being in the womb and like just how water, the way water, you float in water, it holds you.
Suspension,
The bass holds the whole thing. That's why being a bass player, is such an honorable musical position because drummers get get a lot of attention, guitar players get a lot of attention, lead singers get a lot of attention, but the bass player is back there holding everything together. Unless you're Oteil, he also gets a lot of attention because he's so good. But it's like the bass player is like the secret, is sort of the secret, holder of everything in a band, in my opinion.
Yeah,
that's so interesting because
came along at an era.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you
go ahead,
Oteil.
I got it pinned. I got pinned and off to the side because it's gonna be a question for you. I think it's gonna be based off of what you're about to say.
Yeah, I was just gonna say. I think I'm not really different. I came along in that era where people started to recognize, like, man, this space is a thing. Like James Jamerson, it took a long time because they didn't even have their names on the records. But eventually people were like, yo, man, James Jamerson, and all the guys, Larry Graham, what I was referencing on this track, right? Where people were like, hey, what's that? And then on down the line. So by the time I came along, bass players were starting to get looked at a little more. And I'm just crazy, so I tend to stick out. That's just a personality thing. But I think that helped, that era, because it was rough, man. Bass players it was always an instrument nobody wanted to play. And I was a drummer. It was the only one I wanted to play because it moved that same air like the bass drum moves, which is that heartbeat thing. And so if I was going to play an instrument besides drums, bass was the one that attracted me the most because it had that huge womb thing,
I was gonna, that and I knew it was gonna speak to what I like. The growing up for me, I didn't grow up in a band culture. So I knew of bands. I knew like some of your basic band members, right? And I always wondered, what's what's the bass player? What's the bass player? Because I would see the guitar, right? You see a guitar and then you see bass. And I'm like, wait, that's also a guitar. Like what I was like, why are there two of them? And then whenever I would hear the bass and it's that I'm like, ooh, I was like, you can't, I was like, you don't need, yeah, because the guitar player would be, just doing all sorts of like crazy like notes and stuff, but the bass player had a certain level of like you were saying, John, like everything was tying back, it was holding everything together. And I was like, ooh, this is a different. Some people want to do the going all over the plate and doing all the, I've seen,
Yeah.
they playing with their teeth and stuff, and it's cool, great. But like this is because I'm a basketball, I love basketball, right? You have your Steph Currys, but then you have your Draymond Green, right? And Draymond Green is not going to run all over the court and shoot a bunch of threes that and no look and all that. But Draymond Green is gonna hold this ship together. And there's an art to it. And people who really love basketball, like they will love sitting down and watching They'll be like, you've got to watch Draymond Green. If you really like basketball, you got to see the way he directs this, like
Say
directs
what
this
music.
offense. And I'm like, yo, I'm like, this, that's why I feel like the base. I'm like, yeah, they like really are like holding it together
We're
and
the
like
glue.
leading.
We're the glue.
It makes all the difference. It actually makes all the difference.
Now I think people know more now though because like you said before, like if the bass player's bad, they don't even know why they don't like it. I think now they might know a little more. I don't know. I'm biased because I do. I'm like, man, for me, it's the drummer. Like if the drummer is not, I can't even, I won't last 5 minutes. I won't last 5 minutes.
No, it's a balance between the two, I think.
But
right.
But yeah, it's both. Right.
And that's why drummers can notoriously be difficult, because you can't have a band without a good drummer. But the band's not going to feel good if the bass player isn't happening. I've this hands down, like it's not going to feel right. But I think that's also why like hip hop, distilled all the, with taking little pieces of tunes. It's always going to be the drums or the bass and drum groove that is what gets sampled or used over and over, and that's where like, all these questions of publishing and stuff come up with, like, well, the bass line's kind of the hook.
Yeah.
It's everything. It's the tune, it's so I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, think of Bob Marley's, like all those bass lines that Family Man wrote. If you change those, it's not the song anymore. And Anthony Jackson got paid. He knew that hook, do 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 for money.
Yeah,
for the love of money. He was like, "No, man, y'all got to give me a cut of that. That's the whole song." And he got it, and it like bought its house and stuff. You know,
right.
So he was very forward thinking back then. He was like, "Hey, I know I'm just a session guy, but I should get writer's credit on that."
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, every James Brown tune.
Every single one. I mean, in black music, like what Chic. Like from disco on over to through Parliament, James, like the bass is what's Flashlight without what Bernie, like I mean, the bass is really, yeah.
It's something that even as a writer, when I'm, and we'll get into this, I'm sure more with Wisdom, because Wisdom, I took the bass that was provided and was like, let me write specifically to that. Like when I'm closing my eyes, when I'm creating, I'm searching for that rhythm. I'm trying to, like you said, I'm trying to hop on the right channel, right? To continue with these water metaphors. I'm like, what is the channel? What is the frequency? Because my voice here or my writing here is an instrument. It's an instrument that I'm adding to this band, right? It's not only my voice. Even if I'm just doing spoken word and there's no other music around me, I still am like, what is the musicality of this? Right? Because the audience is going to have to hop on that same bass line and be able to ride the beat with me. So it doesn't matter if I'm doing something that's going to be with musical accompaniment, with none. I'm always like, I can walk into a room and I can know my poem if there's a band there, if I can't do the poem, I'm like, hey, y'all, play something. Just play something. And I have poems that are in tune, that I know of about 30, 40 poems in my head that I've written that are in tune. I have other poems that are not in tune. I would never do it with music behind it. Because I'm like, dang, I don't know what frequency I was on here, but it's not the frequency is not it. And then I have poems where I'm like, I found my frequency, I found a channel, I can attach this to some music, and it would make you'd be able to find the rhythm within it.
The Saint Disruption Podcast. Recorded and mixed by Hamilton Media Design at Sidehouse Records.
We will continue this dialogue with Oteil Burbridge and Jahman Hill regarding their collaboration of poetry and music in part 2 of this episode. We will be debuting their second work, Wisdom.
Osiris.